Some white women both eroticized and slandered black men. For instance, in 1731, one white
Here are three important things you
Some white women both eroticized and slandered black men. For instance, in 1731, one white woman declared her desire to engage in sexual relations with a well-endowed black man. However, when caught in such relationships, these women would accuse the black men of corrupting their white womanhood. Historical records show that if accused, black men often faced severe punishments such as genital mutilation or even death by burning. Some white women both eroticized and slandered black men. For instance, in 1731, one white woman declared her desire to engage in sexual relations with a well-endowed black man. However, when caught in such relationships, these women would accuse the black men of corrupting their white womanhood. Historical records show that if accused, black men often faced severe punishments such as genital mutilation or even death by burning. Some white women both eroticized and slandered black men. For instance, in 1731, one white woman declared her desire to engage in sexual relations with a well-endowed black man. However, when caught in such relationships, these women would accuse the black men of corrupting their white womanhood. Historical records show that if accused, black men often faced severe punishments such as genital mutilation or even death by burning. Some white women both eroticized and slandered black men. For instance, in 1731, one white woman declared her desire to engage in sexual relations with a well-endowed black man. However, when caught in such relationships, these women would accuse the black men of corrupting their white womanhood. Historical records show that if accused, black men often faced severe punishments such as genital mutilation or even death by burning. Some white women both eroticized and slandered black men. For instance, in 1731, one white woman declared her desire to engage in sexual relations with a well-endowed black man. However,
I've got a problem that I'm pretty sure you can help me with. Yes, you will be paid for helping me. Actually paid really, really well.
To the slave economy. They were co-conspirators. They bought, sold, and owned slaves. In fact, about 40% of the slave owners were white women. The more slaves a woman had, the more power she had. White women were not passive bystanders to the slave economy. They were co-conspirators. They bought, sold, and owned slaves. In fact, about 40% of the slave owners were white women. The more slaves a woman had, the more power she held. Parents gave their daughters more enslaved people than land. So, to a white Southern woman, owning slaves became tied to her very identity. This is the true story of how white women treated their black slaves. Slavery in the U.S. lasted for more than 400 years, and in that time, the system shaped generations and generations of people. A system that created this psychological distortion. White people dominated the country. They created a violent and oppressive system to terrorize the black community. They used lynchings, beatings, and savage treatment to torment the masses. Even when there wasn't violence, there was segregation. Communities, housing, and the criminal justice system used discriminatory policies. Racism pervaded all aspects of American society. White families gained huge amounts of material benefits and privileges from this racial hierarchy. Before the Civil War, in the South, American white women couldn't vote. When they got married, the husband became the head of the household, and the woman was the heart of the home. Women were considered the property of their husbands. Their mobility and freedom were severely limited. For example, if a woman wanted to travel, she would need a male chaperone. The abuse was considered a normal way to control a woman. They were expected to remain cheerful, pleasant, obedient, and faithful, while their husbands had affairs and female slaves. These women knew that the mixed-race slave children on their properties were their husband's offspring. That's why many white women wanted freedom of their own, power to turn the narrative. That's where slavery came into play. Most people know that George Washington had slaves. They took care of his Mount Vernon home. But very few people know that Martha, his wife, was the one who drastically increased the slave population there. When the couple got married in 1759, George owned about 18 slaves, but Martha owned 84. The high number of people Martha owned might be unusual, but the fact that she had black slaves is not. She and many other white women were violent and active participants in the slave trade. Having many enslaved people increased a woman's chances of finding a good husband. After marriage, white women went to court to keep legal ownership over their slaves, and in many cases, they won. That's because, for women, slavery was their freedom. In the past, historians believed that white women didn't have a significant role in slavery. They based their conclusions on the writings of a small group of white women from the South. However, Jones Rogers, an associate professor of history at the University of California, Berkeley, used a different source: interviews with black people, real evidence that gave her a better look at what happened during the time of slavery.
Enslaved all our lives, and mother was a slave, sisters were slaves. Father was a slave.
They know enough about reading right. All that I know, they teach you to mind your mosque and your mission.
These interviews were part of the Federal Writers Project, a branch of the Works Progress Administration. The truth is, white girls were taught how to become slave owners at a very young age. When they were just 9 months old, they grew up in a world that showed them how to control, own, and master enslaved people.
Other people didn't have no beds when they were slaves. They would sleep on the floor. Pat it here and pat it down. Just like a lot of wild people. We didn't know nothing. Didn't like looking no book.
Many of their family members, even their female cousins, friends, mothers, and grandmothers, were teaching these young women how the world works. They have this property, and once they get married, this property will belong to their husband, unless they are willing to do something about it. And if that husband is a loser, so are you. So, young girls were trained to make sure that whatever happened in their lives, they would need to ensure their success. When a white woman was old enough to have slaves, she could use her social standing to uphold and sustain that power.
Are you aware that the starting salary for a cybersecurity expert exceeds $100,000? Did you also know that many cybersecurity professionals secure their roles without a degree or prior tech experience? Let me show you a comprehensive guide to getting high-paying cybersecurity roles in multinational companies in just 90 days or less. Click the link below to reserve your free spot now in our free upcoming webinar. The job of a cybersecurity expert is both fun and exciting. It's like playing the roles of both the hero and the villain in a game. What makes it even better is that it's a field that's constantly changing and evolving, which means your career will never become boring or feel mundane. The best part, finding work in cybersecurity won't be a challenge. As of this video, there are over 1.2 million unfilled roles. And guess what? 80% of hiring managers seeking cybersecurity talent aren't fixated on degrees. That's right. You don't necessarily need a degree or prior work experience to land a job in cybersecurity. If you join this free webinar, you'll be guided through the easiest and fastest path to a thriving six-figure career in cybersecurity in just 90 days or less. We are Excel Mind Cyber, a coaching academy founded by Tolalupe Michael, a cybersecurity expert coach for cybersecurity enthusiasts. We have helped 200 plus students from a non-tech background to successfully transition into a six-figure cybersecurity career in just 90 days or less. If you join this webinar, you will have all the information you need to land multiple six-figure jobs in cybersecurity. You'll have a realistic and clear understanding of why cybersecurity is a lucrative bet for a career change. You will also know exactly what skills and certifications you need to become a qualified cybersecurity expert, including where and how to obtain them quickly and cheaply. Last but not least, you will learn insider tips for acing your cybersecurity job interviews, including what employers are looking for and how to stand out from the competition. This webinar will be the best introduction and starting point for a wonderful cybersecurity career for you. You will leave with a comprehensive understanding of the different roles in the field so you can pick the direction you want to take. So go ahead, click the link below, and watch the webinar now.
She could dictate the lives of those she owned and could verbally or brutally exploit her servants. What many people today may not realize is that Southern households did their best to reproduce slave society. They wanted more servants at a lower cost. White women born during these periods, whether boys or girls, would watch their parents exert dominion over their black servants. They were taught to mimic their behaviors. They were ready, smart, calculated. They knew exactly what they were doing. The book, They Were Her Property, gives us clear examples of how life back then actually looked like. The first chapter starts with Lizzie Anna Burwell, a 3-year-old who demands her father cut the ears of a black servant and get her a new maid from Clarksville. Her father would then give the girl more slaves as gifts, so that they would become her property. The book reveals how women in the antebellum South could actively possess property and, in turn, lay claim to owning black servants. Legally married women were not recognized as property owners due to the coverture doctrine. This meant that a married couple was seen as having one legal identity, belonging to the husband. In Stephanie McCurry's works, Women's War and Confederate Reckoning, the coverture mirrored the private authority slaveholders held over black servants. Women had limited legal and political standing, and any attempts they made in this regard were met with significant resistance. Jones Rogers acknowledged that coverture often restricted married white women, but she also explained that Southern families frequently bypassed or overlooked these restrictions. Families could transfer property to daughters or other female relatives under the condition that it would remain separate from marital assets. Southern women could, and did, create what we now refer to as prenuptial agreements, or documents like deeds of trust, deeds of gift, and wills, which granted the wife control over all the property she already possessed or would acquire during her marriage. In Louisiana, women could ask the court to establish separate marital estates if their husbands exhibited imprudent financial management. For example, if their husband failed to budget their expenses, accumulated debt, spent too much, etc. In other words, there were two distinct systems that coexisted, a genuine patriarchy alongside an actual framework of legal and financial influence held by white women. There was a common misconception that white women were sheltered and delicate. They kept the household clean of all the impurities of the outside world. But that is absolutely not true. Slave traders, travelers, merchants, city officials, and former black slaves all attested to the presence of white women in 19th century slave markets. When slavery was at its peak, women also sold and bought black servants from the comfort of their own homes, many times within local social networks. Because of their widespread influence, white women created a completely different market of enslaved wet nurses. Now, you might be wondering why these white women felt the need to tear black women from their families to nurse their children. One actual report said that white women who were constantly having babies felt like a slave in their own homes. Black women could ease that burden, so it was easier to buy a wet nurse who would take care of such responsibilities. Depending on her financial status, the white woman could hire, borrow, or purchase an enslaved wet nurse. This gave white women the power to pursue social events while someone else took care of their newborn. Some, but not all, white women were incredibly brutal to their enslaved. They were so violent that their husbands had to restrain them. For example, a wealthy white woman often invested in enslaved men and women so that they would be forced to reproduce and give her more slaves. Historical records kept track of a woman called Henrietta Butler who was forced to have sex with enslaved black men to have a child. She was then forced to nurse her mistress's child, but many other women suffered a similar fate. Masters often raped their enslaved servants to make sure they had an ample supply of wet nurses. White women from affluent households also ran brothels, especially the women who had many male and female slaves. By 1860, nearly half of all African slaves in the Americas were in the United States.
Thinking to start cutting carbs, I need to drop my belly fat.
If you want to drop this,
start eating more of these.
Starving ourselves, eating salads, and cutting out carbs, doing this never works and only leads to more frustration.
You might think this would take years to learn, but we're going to teach it to you in 60 seconds. Watch this. This is a metabolism killer, this is a metabolism killer, and this is a metabolism killer. If you're over 40 and running on the treadmill endlessly and eating salads all day just to lose a few pounds, just stop and listen to what I'm about to tell you. In your 20s, it's easy, right? Put on muscle easily, we're fit, we got tons of stamina, tons of time sometimes. But as you get older, you may not be able to lose weight as quickly or as easily. You may not be able to put muscle on so easily. And you may think or may have been told that there's nothing you can do about it. Well, that isn't true. This is how to get in shape fast. Dr. Drew here. When it comes to cardio, it's true that it burns calories, mainly in the form of carbohydrates free in the blood. But here's the deal. After you work up a sweat, your body tends to replace those calories with your next meal. Steady state cardio can actually release cortisol. Cortisol, of course, is your body's stress hormone, and it's not what you're looking for. It could lead to further muscle breakdown. If you don't like doing steady state cardio, don't do it. Number one, it's not a great way to lose weight. And number two, you're going to hate it. If you hate it and it's not working, you will eventually give up. Dr. Drew and my wife Susan here, we want to show you something. You've probably seen this guy all over your feed claiming that cutting carbs isn't necessary for weight loss. Now, I know it sounds too good to be true, but let me tell you, there's more to this than meets the eye.
The science of weight loss was cracked a long time ago. It's not a trend, it's facts. Following all those like trendy fad diets, all those trending workouts that you see online is literally a waste of time. There's already a proven, research-backed way to lose weight and keep it off.
I decided to delve into this topic and do some research. Turns out this guy is a celebrity trainer who's gained a massive following for challenging mainstream advice. He claims that what we've been told about weight loss is wrong, completely wrong. I've witnessed thousands of clients on B-Shred transform their lives and achieve their best shapes ever by dedicated, say, 20 minutes a day to 3 simple practices. And you know what? It makes a lot of sense when you listen to what he has to say.
The truth is that Hollywood's elite actors and actresses, they can get super ripped because they followed a long ignored technique that was used for generations of bodybuilders and athletes before steroids were even popular. So what's their approach? Well, they ruthlessly cut through the fluff because they have zero time to waste because their next film role is starting in just a few weeks, and so they can't waste time on the wrong program.
Cut out carbs, sugar. It was just not sustainable. Boom, I gained it back so fast. This time I feel like I've done it the healthy way. I've lost 30 pounds. Just do it. Just do it. You won't regret it. You're gonna see it too. You're gonna be like, dang, I look good.
For a while, I just completely cut out carbs, and I realized that was a mistake. After I gave the carbs back, I dropped another 30 pounds.
You will never have to be on the treadmill again. I want to say slowly the weight started coming off, but it came off faster than I thought it would.
All these foods that you don't think that you ever get to eat when following a diet, I'm eating them and I'm in the best shape of my life. Carbs actually regulate your metabolism. Carbs are one of the best ways to give your body energy. If you cycle your carbs properly, you eat more carbs than you've probably ever eaten on a diet, and you get far better results than you've probably ever gotten.
I don't even weigh 210 pounds. You've lost me. That's insane.
I now went from a 6XL. I can now say that I'm in a large.
I had lost right at 30 pounds. My jeans were falling off of me.
So you lost
53 pounds. I went from 189 pounds to 136 pounds.
Dang.
What is the best workout to lose weight? The best way to burn fat and get in shape, it's not keto, paleo, fasting, or vegan, and it's not super intense workout. That ain't how you lose weight. I already did all the hard work to simplify all that information into a very simple and easy to follow plan that literally anybody can do. This is our body type quiz. That's a free quiz. It's 6 different questions. Legit 20 seconds. You can do it.
Seriously?
Yeah, you can do it right now. And then at the end of it, it tells you what your body type is, but it also tells you the 3 most important things to do based on what your body type is. And it's completely free. Yeah, click the link if anybody's watching this, want to figure out your body type, and I'll show you how to get in shape. You can hit that link below and take the quiz. We won't ask for your email or anything like that. Click the link below this video right now, take my free body type quiz, and get your personalized plan right now.
Before Paylocity, we had a separate recruitment platform, a separate onboarding platform, an additional payroll platform. We used to have 25 pieces of paper per new hire, and we don't have any paper now. It's all done by automation and workflows. It saves us easily hundreds of hours when doing payroll. For HR, we don't have to worry about that anymore. Everything just flows seamlessly. It gives us time back to focus on things that are much more important for our team.
That was about 4 to 6 million people, based on reports from the 1860 census. 393,973 white individuals owned 3,950,528 black individuals. Only about 1.5% of the white population in the US owned slaves. It's been over 150 years since slavery legally ended in 1865, but the true trauma wasn't just the experience of slavery, but also the aftermath, when hopes for equality and acceptance were crushed in the 1880 to 1890s due to a shift in beliefs about blacks and whites. When the Civil War came, and it was time to free the enslaved, many white women retaliated. Female slave owners resisted the change by letting the Union authorities know they were loyal. There were many cases where female slave owners sought compensation when the American government abolished slavery in the District of Columbia. Others wanted to keep their property by any means necessary. They went as far as to move their enslaved people away from the areas affected by the war, in a practice known as refugeeing. When the Civil War ended, many white women negotiated labor conditions with freed black people. They tried to maintain control over the young African Americans by taking their children as apprentices. Apprenticeship was another form of labor. Although it was better than complete slavery, it was still not freedom. Ex-slaves were expected to work under the same master or mistress, often for meager wages and a specific time set. Many apprentices worked for the same person that used to be their mistress, and it was not that better than the life they had before. W.E.B. Du Bois, an American sociologist, wrote something about it. He said a slave went free, stood for a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again towards slavery. This brief moment in the sun was when black communities, along with support from the Freedmen's Bureau, started establishing schools, social assistance, and some legal protections. However, this progress was largely undermined by the white Southern elite. That includes white women. They swiftly passed laws known as the Black Codes. Their goal was simple: reintroduce obligations, burdens, and restrictions that would mimic slavery. The Black Codes were designed to take away the voting rights of black people. They were meant to stop them from becoming juries or state militias. Instead, the white people would create this complex system where freed black people could still be controlled. White men and women put in place contract and vagrancy laws. They led to a popular peonage labor system. Peonage is a type of involuntary servitude based on claimed debt. By 1915, at least 6 former slaveholding states had laws that made it possible to force black people to work against their will. For example, if a black person was found guilty of vagrancy, they were forced to work in the convict lease system. This system brought in substantial profits for the wealthy white women and men who both sold and bought the labor of those who were convicted. Experts found a memoir of a white woman called Rebecca Felton. Take a look at this colorized interview from 1929. Felton was a former slave owner who grew up during the Civil War.
I went to Washington 50 years and a little more ago. I saw all the people around there and been with the president. I was one of the board of lady managers for the Chicago Exposition, and I served my full time in Chicago.
In her memoir, she talked about the corruption in Georgia's legal system. She mentioned that there were cases where judges were elected by a dominant faction. During this time, a black person could be sentenced to hard labor for 10 years for stealing just 3 eggs or a bowl of milk. She also noted that a 15-year-old black girl in Atlanta got a 5-year penitentiary for taking 50 cents from another black child. The dominant faction made a huge amount of money, about $500,000 a year, from the convict leasing system, and judges who sent strong black people to prison had much better chances of being elected. But control wouldn't have been possible without the threat of violence. That's where groups like the Ku Klux Klan came into play.
This is Juvederm. Juvederm Ultra XC is the #1 chosen hyaluronic acid lip filler.
Juvederm is the one that has always stood out to me.
For more important safety information and to find a licensed specialist, visit juvederm.com.
They intimidated, brutalized, and murdered black people across the nation. The Women's KKK was a separate but affiliated racist group of white Protestant women. They got more members through empowerment feminism. The first version of the KKK emerged in Pulaski, Tennessee after the Civil War. It was established by men who were upset about the newly liberated black population. They were angry about their political rights and sought purpose, thrill, and a socially accepted platform where they could be violent. These early KKK members wanted something new, but they wanted to keep it under a veil of secrecy, and they did just that. the KKK created a strict organization with many ceremonies that would go perfectly with their hateful, anti-Reconstruction goals. During the starting days of the Klan, women didn't actively participate, but they did sew their husbands' and family members' clothes for the ceremonies. Women also had a symbolic role to play. One of the goals of these extremists, as they saw it, was to shield pure and innocent women from the frightening black people who were now a threat. Especially in its early years, the male Klan held two conflicting views of femininity and womanhood. One was a fantasy, and the other was a concession to real people. In their minds, white Protestant women were pure, virtuous beings whose main purpose was to support and serve men. In return, men would safeguard these vulnerable ladies from those sexually aggressive black men. In the second phase of the Klan came the Women's KKK. This was a related but separate group specifically for white Protestant women. The early days of the WKKK were marked by conflicts within the Klan itself. One leader of the male Klan started a group called the Camellias. It focused on women and advocated for white supremacy so that he could increase his own influence. Another leader joined forces with a secretive women's society called the Queens of the Golden Mask. Eventually, the Golden Mask group prevailed and became the WKKK. It was the first authorized in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1923. At its height, the WKKK had branches in every state, especially in Arkansas, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Indiana. Much like the male KKK, the WKKK had a structured system. Interestingly, the system had similar aspects to the Roman Catholic hierarchy. There were positions like the Imperial Commander, Claylifts, Clocards, Cligraps, Claybees, along with the Klexter Clorogos. People in these positions were responsible for enforcing Klan rules. They recruited members, collected dues, organized events, and so on. But all of these roles and activities were influenced by racism, nationalism, fear of outsiders, and a determination to protect the family. In contrast to their male counterparts, the WKKK didn't often participate in lynching or other violent acts, aside from a 1924 incident where members paraded with clubs. Because of this absence of physical violence, many historians tend to see WKKK members, as well as women in racist movements in general, as obscure and relatively unimportant figures. They just see them as people who worked in the background of their men. But the fact is, the women KKK was very powerful. They were excellent manipulators. They used their social standing to further improve their agendas. Many of these members had organized social clubs before, so it was super easy for them to spread the word and destroy the reputations of political candidates or anyone else they deemed unworthy. These women tried to remove Catholic public school teachers, organized boycotts of businesses, and supported candidates who were aligned with the Klan. They increased their influence by providing food baskets to needy families. They also arranged events like weddings, funerals, speeches, parades, christenings, carnivals, and lectures. By organizing both ceremonial and social activities, these women integrated the Klan and its beliefs into the everyday life of American society. In their minds, all the good people were a part of the Klan. These groups were unsettling precisely because they seamlessly blended with small towns in America. WKKK didn't attract women because it was something new or unusual. No, it was popular because it aligned naturally with the lives of white Protestant Americans and their values and traditions. Many of these women viewed the Klan as a social club, an opportunity to have a good time with friends. But their shared commitment to racism and xenophobia was terrifying. Many of these white women were conservatives to the core. They were dedicated to the cause and had power within their communities. Some of these women were also active outside their homes. Lulu Markwell, for example, was the first national leader of the WKKK. She worked for women's suffrage in Indiana and other states. Daisy Douglas Barr led the Klan, but was also an esteemed Quaker preacher. This means that they had a huge impact on a much broader scale. As you can see, white women were not bystanders when it came to slavery and the slave trade. They were very much involved in the system as their male counterparts. The only thing is that many of these women were believed to be innocent and pure, while in fact, they had their own agendas and were proud to own slaves. They benefited from the slave market and wanted to expand their own riches. After all, they too were born in a system that exploited black people. This system shaped their morals, ethics, and values, creating wide-scale oppression and brutality.
Work, play, blink, relief, blink.
The bizarre intimate lives of white mistresses on the plantation. The owner of the plantation was a woman who was right behind the owner of the plantation in terms of importance. She supervised the work of all the slaves on the plantation. She had great power which she used to exploit said slaves in pure ways. It was inevitable that the private parts of the slaves themselves would be exploited, and that they'd be used to fulfill the lustful fantasies of the plantation owners. Female slaves would be flogged for minor offenses, and their mistresses often left them standing in the field for long periods in the bright sun. From everything attached, it can be concluded that the life of slaves was below any level of humanity, and the life on the plantations is also witnessed by the former slave Harriet Jacobs, the author of Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. The slave girl is raised in an atmosphere of licentiousness and fear. The gnash and the foul talk of her master and his sons are her teachers. When she is 14 or 15, Corona or his sons or the overseer, or perhaps all of them, begin to bribe her with presents. If these fail to accomplish their purpose, she is whipped and starved into submission to their will. Dissatisfied wives. Mistresses were privately very dissatisfied with their lives because they were also slaves in a way and had to be obedient and cheerful, while their husbands also had numerous affairs with black slaves from whom children were born. Humanly to become mistresses surrounded, which was extremely devastating for them, and they felt disgusting. They were very bored when their husbands would go on trips for one reason or another, so they had to find an occupation, and then they exploited the slaves in certain ways, which included satisfying their lustful desires. Housewives married their husbands at the age of 15 or 16, and as they grew up, they became more and more lonely and sad. Affairs between mistresses and slaves were much rarer than their husbands than female slaves. Far from intimate relationships between white mistresses and dark-skinned slaves did not occur, they certainly did, but much less was known about them. These relationships happened because women couldn't quite suppress their sexuality while their husbands were on the road. They were sad and lonely, and their burning desires had to be satisfied by someone. They, like their husbands, practiced extramarital gratification of their passions. As one of the dangers of a potential intimate relationship with black slaves was that children of mixed race would be born. At that time, contraceptive methods were not so widespread, but they did exist. Condoms were made from animal skin, oiled silk, and rubber, and along with other contraceptive methods, were used to prevent pregnancy. Intimacy of dark-skinned slave. From her testimony, it is learned that the abuse of the intimacy of dark-skinned slaves was widespread. Mistresses decided on this type of exploitation of slaves sometimes out of pure boredom, and some were very frustrated in the intimate field. So what they could not achieve in other places, they did with slaves. They were not so powerful in other fields of life, so they saw the satisfaction of low passions as compensation for personal failures in other spheres of life. Intimate relationships were also present between white mistresses and dark-skinned men who were slaves. By focusing attention on the ways that multiple and sometimes conflicting sources of oppression and power are intertwined, such an intersectional analysis allows us to make sense of how persons occupying a position of low status in one social arena can simultaneously occupy one of high status in another. Mistresses were often able to force black slaves to have relations with them, and Captain Richard Hinton also spoke about this. I have never found a bright-looking, colored man whose confidence I have won who has not told me of instances where he has been compelled, either by his mistress or by white women of the same class, to have a connection with them. The aforementioned Harriet Jacobs also spoke about the way in which the mistresses exploited the intimacy of black slaves. They know that the women slaves are subject to their father's authority in all things, and in some cases, they exercise the same authority over the men slaves. I had myself seen the master of such a household whose head was bowed down in
deeply ingrained in the fabric of society, bolstered by legal frameworks that protected this inhumane system. The antebellum South saw the prominence of slave ownership as a cornerstone of the economy and societal hierarchy. Enslaved individuals were frequently acquired through inheritance or marriage into wealthy families, forming an integral part of the legacy passed from generation to generation. They were essential for labor-intensive tasks on plantations and within households, enabling these affluent families to maintain their economic standing. Marie Delphine McCarty's personal life had its own array of intricacies and relationships. Through 3 marriages, she bore 5 children and was reputed to have nurtured them with love. Her first marriage to Don Ramon de Lopez Angulo, a distinguished Caballero de la Royal de Carlos and a senior Spanish officer, brought forth a daughter before tragedy struck with Don Ramon's untimely demise en route to Madrid. Following her first husband's passing, Delphine embarked on a new chapter with a Frenchman named Jean Blanc, marking the beginning of her second marriage. Blanc, a banker, attorney, and legislator, stood as a formidable figure in his own right, nearly matching the affluence of Delphine's own family. Their union yielded a family of 6, including 3 daughters and a son, an emblem of the prosperity they enjoyed. The passage of time led Delphine to her third and final marriage, this time to Leonard Louis Nicholas LaLaurie, a doctor significantly her junior. This union took a more hands-off approach, with Leonard often absent from Delphine's daily activities, leaving her to independently navigate her pursuits. Delphine's life took an intriguing turn when she acquired a grand 3-story mansion at 1140 Royal Street in the heart of the French Quarter. As a member of high society, she joined the ranks of other affluent women who held enslaved people. Public perceptions of Madame LaLaurie were marked by surprise at her seemingly gracious treatment of her slaves. She even enacted acts of manumission in 1819 and 1832, liberating 2 of her slaves and portraying an image of kindness in the public eye. What happened behind closed doors inside LaLaurie Mansion? However, lurking beneath this facade was a chilling reality. Despite the existence of laws in New Orleans aimed at protecting enslaved people from extreme brutality, the reality within the LaLaurie household was shockingly dire. Whispers abound that a 70-year-old chef endured starvation, his existence bound to a stove with chains. In a dark twist, hidden enslaved people were reserved for the twisted medical experiments of her physician husband, delving into the realm of Haitian voodoo medicine. The horror didn't spare even her own daughters, who faced brutal whippings should they dare to show compassion towards the enslaved. Two of these tales have been substantiated over time. One haunting account tells of a man who, unable to endure the torment inflicted by Madame LaLaurie, chose to fling himself from a 3rd-story window, his fear of retribution outweighing the fear of gravity. This very window remains preserved today, sealed with a somber veil of cement. The second story introduces Leah, a 12-year-old slave girl who inadvertently triggered a furious outburst from Madame LaLaurie while attending to her hair. The consequence of this rage was a whipping that propelled the young girl onto the roof, mirroring the tragic fate of the young man before her. The roof's edge was the precipice of despair as Leah too met her untimely demise. Witnesses recounted the heart-wrenching scene of Madame LaLaurie burying Leah's lifeless body, prompting her to sell 9 enslaved people and pay a $300 fine. However, this meager punishment was short-lived, as she soon reacquired the enslaved people she had seemingly relinquished. The tragic death of Leah only deepened the town's suspicions, rendering the enslaved individuals the last to be accounted for during the fire's chaotic aftermath. What became of Madame LaLaurie after her crimes were exposed? Following the fire and the shocking discoveries within the mansion, an outraged mob of approximately 4,000 residents descended upon the house, leaving only its exterior walls intact. LaLaurie and her driver disappeared, their fate shrouded in mystery. Some speculate she fled to Paris, but this remains unconfirmed. A plaque discovered years later in a cemetery suggests a date of death in 1842, though conflicting records indicate 1849. The enigma surrounding her fate persists, echoing the uncertainty that shrouds her legacy. Yet, amidst the darkness, a more unsettling revelation emerges: the complex relationships between white women and black male slaves. These relationships encompassed emotional bonds, sexual attraction, and manipulation, often leading to pregnancies that brought forth a desperate need for secrecy due to societal shame. Infanticide and abandonment were tragic outcomes, as these children posed a threat to revealing the illicit unions. Some children resulting from these relationships were passed off as white, living within white families while concealing their true heritage. Unraveling the factors driving such relationships is a nuanced endeavor. Emotional bonds might have formed due to proximity, while sexual attraction likely played a role. The necessity of secrecy and the fear of societal repercussions further complicated these relationships, leading to heart-wrenching outcomes. In peeling back the layers of this lesser-known facet of history, we confront the unsettling reality that women, too, were capable of cruelty. Recognizing the depths of suffering endured by victims of ruthless mistresses serves as a solemn reminder of humanity's capacity for empathy and brutality. By delving into this tragic past, we strive to prevent its recurrence and pave the way toward a more equitable and just future. We value your insights. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this content enlightening, remember to like and subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Thank you for watching.
What you see here is actually not near the entrenched racist behavior in the Arab world. The matter of the fact is that racism is, and always has been, deeply ingrained into Arab communities. The Arab slave trade is a fact of history, a sad fact, and anti-black racism is a fact of current reality, a sad reality. These are shameful affairs that must be confronted.
So, I've lived in Dubai for almost 8 years. I did my high school here, my national diploma, my bachelor's, my master's here in Dubai. I had my child here, everything. And every single time I've been disrespected in this country, it's been coming from the low-budgeted Arabs. By that, I mean it's coming from the Egyptians, the Lebanese people, the Iraqis, with Pakistani, Bangladesh, whatever, that community. You know, those are the ones that discriminate black people in this country. You people that discriminate black people and make Dubai look like it's racist and they discriminate against black people, but it's coming from the low-budget Arabs and the Indians. Why are you so comfortable to do that?
The low-esteemed poor Arabs from Turkey, from Bangladesh, from Nepal, those people are the worst at treating black people like shit. And it needs to get into the light. We need to stop hiding. African people, stop hiding. This is something that is affecting us. The reason why we concentrate a lot on white racism, white people, white colonialist, white history is because of black Americans. They are living in a place where there is majority of white governance, white rules, white regulations, white people. So they are oppressed by white people and they speak about white people. And we Africans, on the other hand, are oppressed by the Arabs, by the Asians, but we don't speak about it. And also when you come out and speak about it, people want you to keep quiet.
I posted the other video about racism in the UAE and I saw so many comments. I wish I could go through all of them. It's very sad that all of us are experiencing the same thing just because of our skin color.
the energy that we put on white people is the same energy we should be putting on these Arabs, these Asians that are treating us as shit.
But what triggered me to post that video was because I've been trying to secure an apartment here in Sharjah, but I've not been able to. Not because I could not afford it, but just because I'm black. Real estate agents in Sharjah will not give an apartment to a black family. Just because we're black, they will not give us a home. There's a new rule in Sharjah by the real estate company saying no Africans.
Humanity has truly never known the hatred, malice, and annihilation of greater magnitude, savagery, or longevity than that which has been perpetrated against the peoples of Africa. For instance, what can one make of UK Conservatives' top donor Frank Hester speaking of hating all black women in a public space? One never stops to wonder where such hate could find the pride of airing itself before the global hearing of all kinds of peoples and tongues. What is behind it? It is the hardest thing to come to grips with. This was just days ago, this month of March, when the Frank Hester affair was rekindled. The Guardian newspaper had quoted Frank Hester as referring to Diane Abbott, who became the first black woman to be elected to the Parliament of the United Kingdom when she won a seat in 1987. Frank Hester, it was said, had uttered the extremist statement a few years ago that looking at the country's longest-serving black lawmaker, Diane Abbott, made him want to hate all black women, and she should be shot.
Just like that.
Just like that?
The fact that there are black people out there who don't know that anti-blackness is global is ridiculous. Like, wake the hell up, ya.
Such an extremist statement of hate, coming from none other but one of UK Conservatives' top donors, about a fellow human being like himself who had obviously done nothing wrong.
This calls for very serious brooding concerning how we ought to regard and relate with one another as one humanity and as one race.
This calls for some very serious state of careful deliberation on what has to go on or what has to come to a permanent halt.
Abbott, the age of 70, had issued a statement in response saying that Hester's remarks were alarming for a public figure who is a visible presence in the community because she doesn't have a car and regularly walks or takes the bus. "It is frightening," Abbott said. "I am a single woman, and that makes me vulnerable anyway. But to hear someone talking like this is worrying." Other persons of high status had also expressed disapproval. The Minister for Women and Equalities, Kemi Badenoch, was one of those who had spoken up. Thus, she had tweeted in a post on X, "Hester's 2019 comments, as reported, were racist. Abbott and I disagree on a lot, but the idea of linking criticism of her to being a black woman is appalling." Although Hester had said that he tried to apologize to Abbott and accepted that the statement he made concerning her person in that private meeting years ago was rude, but his criticism had nothing to do with either her gender or color of skin. It is impossible to really ascertain the truth of this assertion. However, that is just one instance amongst a dozen tons of other instances of hateful treatment being directed at black people on a daily basis all over the world. Which brings us to the basics of today's video, examining how Arabs are the most racist against blacks.
This is really unacceptable. Good.
We came to India here to study. Now we are being attacked just because this is time for Ramadan and Muslims who are praying, not even Christians. There have been existing Muslims here in India, but none of them talks about this. Why only the African students?
We will be exposing works, thought forms, lineage behavior of racist Arabians towards black people, and the acrimonious tendencies the black community amongst them are being beset with for as long as anyone can remember. Before we delve right into this proper, as always, don't you forget to encourage our works by simply hitting that like button in front of you, share with your friends and families to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and kindly subscribe to stay on with us for more, while you help as well in building the rising membership of this channel. We are delighted to have you with us. Still on the affairs of racism around the globe, more than a dozen men have recently attacked international students who were performing Ramadan prayers at their Gujarat University accommodation in India over 48 hours ago. G.S. Malik, the police commissioner of Ahmedabad City, told reporters that around 24 people entered the hostel on Saturday night and objected to the African students offering prayers, asking them to do so in a mosque.
Come to our own hostel to disturb people who are praying. This is really unacceptable. This is
We came to India here to study. Now we are being attacked just because this is time for Ramadan and Muslims who are praying, not even Christians. There have been existing Muslims here in India, but none of them talks about this. Why only the African students? Now they are breaking down the bicycles, the bikes, everything is being demolished down. Imagine bikes people costed for. These guys have been hiding the racism and all that. Today they have really shown their true color. There's no one, the police are not responding. Look, this is how they attack.
Navid Siddiq, a student from Afghanistan who was injured in the attack, told the Times of India newspaper that he and other students were offering Taraweeh, a special nightly prayer occurring during Ramadan, when 3 people entered the hostel and began questioning them. An argument ensued, and they had returned with a larger mob armed with stones, iron pipes, and attacked us. They went on a rampage in the hostel, assaulting students in their rooms and damaging property and vehicles, he told the newspaper. This is just another one of those events born of division and separatism that we still have not stopped seeing happen amongst us every once in a while. Only this time it is happening in India. But it is, and has always been, about that same mindset that all humanity would unanimously have to expunge from her midst for the words unity and oneness to be achieved. However, in the Arab world, worst case racism exists. People with dark skin are seriously discriminated against and often see their rights curtailed. Racism is a virus that has embedded itself into the heart and soul of Arab communities, thriving on ignorant perpetuation. Many Arabs don't feel compelled to question their bigotry because it has been so deeply ingrained into our cultural hegemony that it has become second nature, says the Arabian Janine al-Shalabi, a speaker and writer. Take a quick flick through some Arab TV channels. The only time you would see people with darker skin tones was when they were portrayed as servants or villains. Ideally, the actors had porcelain skin that glistened on screen, despite the fact that in the US alone, 20% of the Muslim population is black. TV constructed an unobtainable beauty standard for the Arab population, teaching them to equate dignity with Eurocentrism, and it doesn't stop there. Growing up, many Arab children would have been introduced to a desert called Ras Ilabed, which literally translates to the head of chocolate, said to resemble the head of a slave due to its dark color. Thousands enjoyed this sweet without caring to confront its racist origins. The examples provided so far may seem like mere jokes or meager coincidences, but the actuality is, these insignificant occurrences are indicators of larger webs of underlying prejudice that can easily spawn into something much bigger and much more horrifying. Let's hear what a Namibian who works in Turkey has to say about this. I am a Namibian living and working in Turkey. Being the only black and African person here who's ever worked here, the pressure is so much. You need to have a thick skin to remain in a similar setting. The jokes they make, the kind of questions they ask, the privileges given to the Turks, the looks you get from colleagues and outside people when you go to the shops to buy something, the trips you take on public transportations, and how everyone looks at you with disgusted faces, how no one wants to sit or stand close to you. To anyone going through this, be strong and be financially responsible, and go back home and invest your money back home, where you won't ever feel like you are useless or unimportant. While that was a very touching experience from our Namibian brother, this racist attitude has become even more prevalent in Arab countries for the most reason that Arab governments, particularly those that import foreign labor from Africa and Southeast Asia, have failed to implement or enforce anti-discrimination and anti-exploitation laws. North Africa's whites came to look upon blacks as an abject race of slaves and treated them accordingly. Tuaregs utilized superior arms, transport, fear, intimidation, and their knowledge of the vast Sahara and control of Saharan resources to rule and exploit enslaved blacks, known as Ikalan. Under rising nomadic power, both Arabic-speaking and Berber-speaking pastoralists began to use racial identity as a more explicitly ideological justification of their position of domination over sedentary communities. The common feature in the emerging color-coded schemes of social status and identity in the Sahara was the negative and servile connotation of blackness. Thus, in the period just prior to European colonization, race functioned primarily as a legitimization of domination and enslavement of people defined as black. Along these lines, local Arabo-Berber intellectuals in the Sahara rewrote the history of relations between their ancestors and black Africans in a way that made them, in addition to rightful slave masters of blacks, the bearers of Islamic orthodoxy and holders of religious authority. In the northern zone, enslaved blacks were exploited as domestic servants, concubines, and porters, and even as elite Praetorian guards under Morocco's Moulay Ismail, 1672 to 1727. Across northern Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, domestic, household slavery predominated. Master-slave relations tended to be face-to-face and relatively more humane than the hereditary chattel slavery found in the vast Sahara. Slavery and anti-black racism has been and continues to be harsher in Saharan zones. A slave mode of economic production emerged on the backs of enslaved blacks. When slavery dominates economic production, it takes a crueler form. In the Sahara, brutally enforced, racialized, hereditary chattel slavery emerged. In contrast, in northern zones of the Maghreb, enslaved blacks were mainly exploited as domestic servants and concubines. In warmer, face-to-face interactions, the labor of enslaved black Africans made the Sahara habitable. The initial wells and irrigation in the Sahara were dug and operated by slave labor. Enslaved blacks dug and tended wells, excavated and maintained the underground channels of Foggara, irrigated gardens, cultivated dates, and tended flocks. The arduous and relentless work to irrigate in a desert included digging channels tens of feet into the sand, with the risk of being drowned under it. The oases across the Saharan zones of North African countries still reveal remnants of a racialized slave mode of production. The same is true for parts of the Sahara, loosely controlled by states. When it comes to the examples of anti-blackness in the Arab world, it really doesn't take much searching to see it. Mafaz al-Suwaidan, a PhD student in Harvard's Committee on the Study of Religion program, said in a meeting, she mentioned that racism is embedded in certain words in the language, the interactions with a predominantly migrant class, whether that be non-Khaliji Arabs or non-Arabs, and the way people treat their domestic workers. She referred to the kafala system that limits workers' freedom, leaving them vulnerable to exploitation and violation of their rights. In many Arab nations, black workers are lured into menial jobs where their passports are confiscated upon arrival, and they are forced into humiliating and often inhuman working conditions. They have little to no protection under the law and are particularly vulnerable to exploitation, including extraordinarily long working hours, withholding of salaries, sexual, mental, and physical abuse, and denial of travel. The recent case of Alem Dechesa brought to light the horrors faced by migrant workers in Lebanon. Dechesa, a domestic worker from Ethiopia, had committed suicide after suffering terrible mental and physical abuse at the hands of her Lebanese employers, whose savage beating of her in front of the Ethiopian consulate in a video had gone viral years ago. A few activists in some of these places have had enough of such treatments and are starting to rise up. The greatest progress so far has been made in Tunisia. Tunisia is the first Arab country to have passed an anti-racism law. An intense discussion about racism emerged there after the 2011 revolution. It resulted from a vibrant civil society making use of the freedom of expression. In October 2018, the Tunisian parliament passed a law that defined racism and made racist statements and deeds punishable by law. Yet, even in Tunisia, many rights activists say there has been little progress in turning legislation into reality. To me, there's no change, says Kenza Benazouz, who researches discrimination in Tunisia. We don't talk about race. We don't have data based on race. We don't want to acknowledge it. Passing a law is not enough. Kaula Ksiksi, the co-founder of the Voices of Tunisian Black Women, says the law only exists on paper, since victims of discrimination and racist attacks don't have the means to take lengthy and costly legal action against perpetrators. According to her, there is still not enough political will to implement the national strategy that the law envisions. Shiksi is a lawyer and says she dreams of seeing pictures of black children in textbooks and black Tunisians assume top posts in the government and the courts. Roughly 10% to 15% of Tunisians are black, many of them descended from slaves, analysts say. While Tunisia became the first Arab country to ban slavery in the 19th century, its legacy remains tangled in Arabic slurs that refer to black people as slaves and in complicated community relationships, especially in the South. Reem Garfi's maternal relatives came from Sudan, although it is unclear how and when they arrived in Tunisia, she says. Her father's fair-skinned family wanted nothing to do with her parents' marriage. When her mother got pregnant, things only got worse. My paternal grandmother used the N-word in Tunisian Arabic, says Garfi, now 25 and a freelance translator. She said she couldn't believe my mother would give birth to a monkey. In the language of the Arabians, which happens to mirror some form of daily life, like it is with the verbal background of every human, the deep-seated racism is revealing. There are a number of racist expressions used on people with dark skin. They are degrading and dehumanizing because they emphasize the superiority of people with white skin. Some of these expressions can be traced back to when the Islamic and Arab world still practiced slavery and were involved in the slave trade. These expressions have outlasted slavery and even become set phrases and figures of speech that are used daily. Black is often synonymous with a bad omen in these sayings. The colors black and white are also used as opposites to stand for good or evil, with reference to the selection of a life partner, for example, or descriptions of feelings or experiences. As in other Arab countries, few black Tunisians hold top jobs in the media, government, or the private sector. When a black journalist was tapped as a weather reporter on state TV a few years ago, he told local media he felt a responsibility to stand up also against racism. Tunisia's Law 50 aimed to do just that. Passed after years of campaigning, the 2018 legislation sets prison sentences of up to 3 years and maximum fines of nearly $1,000 for those found guilty of racial discrimination. The law also reflects changing mindsets. Today, more than 6 in 10 Tunisians agree that racism is a problem, according to the Arab Barometer survey, compared to just 6% of Egyptians, for example. But few racial discrimination cases have been filed, nor has Tunisia developed a national strategy or action plan to fight racism, rights experts say. Sometime last year, President Kais Saied's racist and xenophobic speech had incited a wave of violence against black Africans. During a National Security Council meeting on the 21st of February, 2023, the Tunisian president, Saied, had said that hordes of irregular migrants from sub-Saharan Africa had come to Tunisia, with all the violence, crime, and unacceptable practices that entails. He said this was an unnatural situation and part of a criminal plan designed to change the demographic makeup and turn Tunisia into just another African country that doesn't belong to the Arab and Islamic nations anymore. Shortly after the Tunisian president made this statement, hell and fury were unleashed on all the blacks living in Tunisia. President Saied must retract his comments and order investigations to clearly signal that anti-black racist violence will not be tolerated. The president must stop finding scapegoats for Tunisia's economic and political woes. The community of black African migrants in Tunisia is now gripped by fear of assault or being arbitrarily arrested and summarily deported, said Heba Morayeff, Amnesty International's director for the Middle East and North Africa. So far, the Tunisian authorities have sought to downplay these violent attacks and even deny them altogether. Authorities should prioritize the investigation of incidents of police violence against black migrants, put an immediate end to forcible returns currently underway, and prevent any further racially motivated attacks by gangs or state agents. For 2 weeks, the authorities denied racist violence against black Africans had occurred. After the international outcry provoked by the president's comments, the authorities announced new measures on 5th of March to facilitate the legal residency of migrants, as well as a process of repatriation for those wishing to voluntarily leave the country. But the attacks and violence have continued. Amnesty International interviewed 20 people in Tunis, among them 5 asylum seekers and 15 undocumented migrants from Cameroon, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, Guinea, and Ivory Coast. They were all attacked by mobs, and in at least 3 cases, the police were present but failed to intervene to stop the attacks or arrest the perpetrators. Since the beginning of February, Avocats Sans Frontières, ASF, an organization providing legal aid to asylum seekers and migrants, has confirmed at least 840 Black African migrants, students, and asylum seekers rounded up in several cities in Tunisia. Many of those interviewed said that violence and hostility against Black people were a regular feature of their life in Tunisia. However, 20 witnesses said the attacks escalated after the president's speech. Witnesses described to Amnesty International how, after the president's speech, Tunisian men, sometimes armed with batons and knives, had taken to the streets of the capital and attacked them or raided their houses. On the 24th February, Manuela D., 22, a Cameroonian asylum seeker, was stabbed in the chest, causing horrific injuries. She was attacked by a group of 6 men who shouted racist insults at her. She told Amnesty International that she was in Ariana neighborhood in Tunis, outside a cafe, when she felt a violent blow on the neck. She fell on the ground and heard voices shouting, in French, "Go back home, you gang of blacks, we don't want you here." When she woke up, she was in the hospital, covered in blood, her clothes torn. She had a long, open wound on her right breast and other injuries to her abdomen and her lips. She shared with Amnesty International a photo taken that night, showing the injury sustained to her breast. Aziz, 21, from Sierra Leone, told Amnesty International that he came to Tunisia in June 2021 to work as a construction worker. He said that a few days after the president's speech, 10 Tunisians came to his house in Ariana, broke the door, stole his things, and forced him and his family out. He said the people who attacked and shoved him and his wife said, "All Black people must leave. They don't want to see us. They don't want us here. They took our money, even our food. They said, we don't want any Black people. Go back to Africa." In 8 cases, migrant workers and asylum seekers said that they had been forced out of their homes by mobs and that their belongings had been either stolen or destroyed. 10 told Amnesty International that they had been expelled by their landlords after authorities threatened to punish anyone hosting or employing illegal migrants. Some of those interviewed were staying in unhygienic conditions in a makeshift camp in front of the International Organization for Migration in Tunis, with no access to food except some distributed by volunteer citizens groups, or a toilet or warm clothes, having lost all their belongings. Several witnesses had said they were assaulted and arrested by the police. Milena, a student from Burkina Faso, reported that she was subjected to physical and verbal attacks by the police. She told Amnesty International that she was coming out of the supermarket on the morning of 3rd of March, when 3 Tunisian men standing nearby began to insult her, telling her to leave the country. A passing police car then stopped, but instead of addressing the men, asked her to produce her residency permit. She replied that she was a student and produced her school documents. However, she was immediately handcuffed, forced into the police car, and taken to Ariana Police Station. She said, "When I got to the police station, one policeman shouted at me saying, 'You blacks create problems,' and another one kneed me in the stomach." 4 hours of detention had passed before Milena was finally released after a Tunisian woman whom she knew came to vouch for her. Jomo, 30, a construction worker from Côte d'Ivoire, told Amnesty International that on 5th of March at about 8 p.m., he was sleeping in a house in Sfax that he shares with 5 others.